When Elvis returned from the Army in 1960, his career picked up almost immediately. The records started selling again, the film offers came in, his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had kept things moving while Elvis was away, and the machinery of his career was ready to run at full speed the moment he stepped back onto American soil. Charlie Hodge did not have that kind of return waiting for him. Charlie came back from Germany with the same thing he had when he left: a love of music, some performing experience, and a lot of hope. He tried to build something in the music industry. He worked at it, but the opportunities were limited and the breaks he needed did not come. The entertainment business is not easy for anyone, and for someone without a major label backing or a famous name attached to them, it can be especially difficult. Charlie spent time trying to make things work. But by the early 1960s, it was clear that his career was not going in the direction he had hoped. He was also dealing with something that went beyond professional frustration. Charlie had real health concerns during this period. He struggled physically, and there were times when his situation looked genuinely uncertain. He did not have a strong financial foundation. He did not have a stable setup at home. Things were difficult in a way that went beyond just a slow career. So Charlie reached out to Elvis. The exact nature of every conversation they had is not fully documented, but what happened next is clear from the historical record. Charlie asked Elvis if there was a place for him in his world. He needed stability, he needed support, and he trusted Elvis enough to ask for it directly. For most celebrities in Elvis's position, this would have been an uncomfortable moment. Elvis was one of the most famous people in the world at the time. He had handlers, a management structure, and a reputation to protect. Bringing someone into his inner circle, especially someone who was not a proven professional or a business contact, was not a small decision. It opened them up to criticism. It meant taking responsibility for another person's well-being, not just as a one-time gesture, but on an ongoing basis. Elvis said yes. He brought Charlie into his life in a real and practical way. Charlie came to Graceland. He was given a place to stay, not as a temporary guest, but as someone who was genuinely part of the household. Elvis also gave him a role within his professional setup. Charlie became part of the group that traveled with Elvis, helped manage things behind the scenes, and supported him on stage and off. He handed Elvis water and scarves during concerts. He tuned guitars. He sang backing vocals. He was useful, and Elvis made sure he had a real function so that his presence made sense in a practical way. But here is the part that says the most about what Elvis actually gave up. Not everyone around Elvis was happy about this arrangement. Some people in his circle thought Charlie was simply taking advantage of a generous man. There were comments, there was quiet criticism. Some people used a word that Elvis hated hearing applied to the people he cared about. They called Charlie a freeloader. They questioned why someone of Elvis's stature was housing and paying a man whose professional contributions seemed minor compared to what he was receiving. Elvis heard all of it. He was not unaware of what people were saying, but he did not change his position. He addressed it directly when he had to. He told people around him that Charlie was his friend, that Charlie was there because he wanted him there, and that the arrangement was not open for discussion. He defended Charlie's place in his world without apology. That kind of defense costs something. It costs social comfort. It costs the approval of people whose opinions you care about. It means choosing one person's dignity over the easier path of simply letting the criticism win. Elvis made that choice, clearly and without hesitation. Charlie had come to Elvis with a problem that had no clean or convenient solution, and Elvis had responded not with a short-term fix, but with a long-term commitment. He had opened his home, his work, and his reputation to protect a friend who needed him. That was the favor, and that was the answer. When people talk about Elvis's generosity, they usually talk about the cars. He bought Cadillacs for strangers. He handed out jewelry. He paid medical bills for people he had never met. These stories are real, and they say something genuine about who he was. But that kind of generosity, as meaningful as it is, comes from a position of abundance. You give what you have extra of, and the giving feels good. What Elvis did for Charlie Hodge was a different kind of giving entirely. It was not a single transaction. It was not a moment of impulse where he reached into his pocket and solved a problem. What Elvis gave Charlie was sustained, deliberate, and personal. He gave him time. He gave him proximity. He gave him a place inside the most private parts of his life. and he absorbed the cost of that decision every single day, for years. Graceland was Elvis's home, but it was also his sanctuary. It was the one place in the world where he could exist without performing for anyone. The outside world demanded a version of Elvis that was always on, always larger than life. Graceland was where that pressure came off. He controlled who came in and who stayed. The people who lived there or spent significant time there were not chosen casually. They were people Elvis trusted completely. Giving Charlie a permanent place in that space was a significant decision. It meant that his sanctuary was also Charlie's home. It meant that the boundaries of his private life extended to include someone else's needs, someone else's presence, someone else's difficulties. That is not a small thing for anyone. And for someone like Elvis, who had almost no truly private space in the world, it was even more meaningful. Charlie lived at Graceland for years. He was there during the good periods and during the hard ones. He saw Elvis when Elvis was healthy and performing at his best. He also saw Elvis during the years when his health was declining, when his weight was fluctuating, when the prescription drug dependency that would eventually define the final chapter of his life was becoming more serious. Charlie was not a distant friend who received a generous gift and went on his way. He was present through all of it. Elvis also paid Charlie a regular salary. This was not occasional financial help. It was a structured, ongoing commitment that made Charlie professionally dependent on Elvis's continued goodwill. For Charlie, this provided stability. For Elvis, it meant that the arrangement was not something he could quietly step back from. He had made Charlie's livelihood part of his own responsibility. The criticism from people inside Elvis's circle did not stop after Elvis made his position clear. It continued in quieter ways. There was an ongoing undercurrent of feeling among some of the Memphis Mafia, the group of friends and associates who surrounded Elvis, that Charlie's position was not entirely earned. Some felt that others worked harder, contributed more, and received less. Whether that assessment was fair or not, it created tension, and Elvis sat inside that tension for years, consistently choosing to maintain Charlie's place in his world despite it. There was also a professional dimension to this that often gets overlooked. When Charlie stood on stage with Elvis during his concert years in the 1970s, handing him water, draping scarves around his neck, providing small logistical support during performances, he was visible to audiences. He was part of the show in a minor but real way. Elvis could have filled that role with someone who had stronger professional credentials. He chose Charlie instead. He made his friend part of his professional life in a visible, public way, which was its own kind of endorsement. What all of this adds up to is something that is harder to measure than a car or a check. Elvis gave Charlie a life, a stable, purposeful, connected life inside a world that Charlie would never have accessed on his own. And he protected that gift against the people who wanted to take it away, not once, but consistently over the course of many years. That is what genuine sacrifice inside a friendship actually looks like. It is not dramatic. It is not a single heroic moment. It is just a long, quiet, steady choice to keep showing up for someone, even when it would have been easier not to. There is a particular kind of loyalty that only reveals itself under pressure. Anyone can be a good friend when things are easy, when life is comfortable, when the person you care about is doing well, when being close to them costs you nothing. That kind of friendship does not require much. The real test comes later. It comes when the person you love is struggling, when being associated with them carries a cost, when the easier path is to quietly create some distance and protect yourself. Charlie Hodge never took the easier path. By the mid-1970s, Elvis's life was becoming more complicated. The concert schedule was relentless. He was performing hundreds of shows a year, often in poor health, pushing through nights when he should have been resting. The prescription drug situation that had been developing for years was now deeply embedded in his daily life. His weight had become a public conversation. The press was not always kind. People who had once celebrated him were now writing about his decline with a mixture of concern and something closer to mockery. This was not an easy time to be close to Elvis. Some people who had been part of his world found reasons to step back. Some managed their association with him more carefully. The inner circle that had once felt tight began to show its edges. Charlie did not step back. He stayed at Graceland. He continued to travel with Elvis. He was on stage with him during those final touring years, standing close, doing the same small, practical things he had always done, handing him water, adjusting the microphone, being present. To someone watching from the audience, Charlie's role might have looked minor, but to Elvis, having a trusted and familiar face close by during those difficult performances meant something that cannot be fully measured from the outside. Charlie was at Graceland in August 1977. He was there on August 16th, the day Elvis died. The details of that day are well documented. Elvis was found unresponsive in his bathroom by his fiancée, Ginger Alden, in the afternoon. Emergency services were called. Attempts were made to revive him. He was taken to Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis, where he was pronounced dead. The official cause listed was cardiac arrhythmia. He was 42 years old. For the people who had been closest to Elvis, that day was devastating in a way that is difficult to put into words. These were not people who had known a celebrity from a distance. They had lived with him, traveled with him, eaten meals with him, and spent years inside the daily rhythm of his life. Charlie had done all of that for nearly 2 decades. What Charlie did in the years that followed says everything about the kind of friend he had been. He did not write a book. In the years after Elvis died, a number of people who had been close to him produced memoirs, gave interviews, and sold their stories to publications looking for inside accounts of life at Graceland. Some of those accounts were sympathetic, others were not. Red West and some of the other former members of the Inner Circle published the book before Elvis even died that dealt with difficult aspects of his private life. The market for Elvis stories was real, and people with access to genuine inside knowledge could have profited significantly from sharing it. Charlie stayed quiet. He gave occasional interviews over the years, and in those interviews he spoke about Elvis with straightforward affection and respect. He did not sensationalize. He did not reveal private details for effect. He did not position himself as someone who had witnessed the tragedy and was now ready to share the full story for the right price. He simply remembered his friend the way a real friend remembers someone, with honesty, with care, and without turning the memory into a transaction. When you place Charlie's behavior after Elvis's death alongside everything Elvis did for Charlie during his life, the full picture of this friendship becomes clear. Elvis gave Charlie stability, dignity, and a place in the world when Charlie had none of those things. Charlie gave Elvis something that was equally valuable and far less common: loyalty that never had a price on it. Elvis sacrificed comfort, reputation, and years of sustained effort to protect his friend. Charlie repaid that by protecting Elvis's memory with the same quiet, consistent commitment. That is what this story is really about. Not a single dramatic moment, not one grand gesture. Just 2 people who decided, over the course of nearly 2 decades, to keep showing up for each other. One gave what he had, the other gave what mattered most. And in the end, that exchange defined both of them. In 1958, Elvis Presley was the biggest name in American music. He had hit records, a growing film career, and millions of fans around the world. Then, the U.S. Army drafted him. For most people, being drafted meant putting your life on hold. For Elvis, it meant leaving behind everything he had built. At the exact moment his career was at its peak. He reported for duty in March 1958. He went through basic training like every other soldier. The Army did not give him special treatment, and Elvis did not ask for it. He was assigned to the 3rd Armored Division and eventually sent to West Germany, where he would spend most of his time in service. He lived in a regular house off base with his father Vernon and some close friends. He did his job, he kept a low profile. It was during this period that Elvis met Charlie Hodge. Charlie Hodge was from Decatur, Alabama. He was a musician, a singer, and someone who had spent years trying to find his footing in the entertainment world. He had some talent, a good personality, and the genuine love for music, but he was not famous. He had no major record deal, no big break waiting for him. He was just a young man in the Army, the same as thousands of others. Elvis and Charlie ended up on the same troop ship crossing the Atlantic Ocean in September 1958. The journey took several days. There was not much to do on the ship, and the two men started talking. They talked about music, about home, about the strange circumstances that had brought them both to this point. Charlie could play guitar and sing. Elvis loved nothing more than sitting around with someone who shared that same love. What started as conversation turned into something more. They sang together on that ship, they swapped stories, they found out they had grown up with similar tastes, similar backgrounds, and similar ways of looking at the world. By the time the ship reached Germany, the two men had formed a real connection. This is important to understand. Elvis was surrounded by people his entire life. Fans, managers, journalists, strangers who wanted something from him. It was not easy for him to know who was genuinely interested in him as a person. But Charlie had no reason to impress Elvis. He was not chasing fame through the connection. He was not looking for a shortcut. He was just a guy on a ship who liked music and found someone else who felt the same way. Elvis recognized that. He was good at reading people, and he could tell the difference between someone who was drawn to the celebrity and someone who was drawn to him. Charlie was the second kind. That mattered to Elvis more than most people realize. Their time in Germany gave them the chance to build that friendship properly. They were both away from home, both adjusting to military life, and both leaning on music as a way to get through it. Elvis would hold informal gatherings at his off-base house where he and the people around him would sing gospel songs, old country tunes, and rhythm and blues numbers late into the night. Charlie was always there. He fit naturally into those evenings. He was not a guest or an outsider. He became a regular part of Elvis's world during that period. By the time Elvis was discharged in March 1960 and returned to the United States, the friendship was already well established. These were not two people who had simply crossed paths. They had spent a significant amount of time together in a setting where there was no glamour, no audience, and no performance. What they had was built on honest, everyday interaction. Elvis went back to his career. The records started coming again, the movies followed. The world welcomed him back as if he had never left. But he did not forget the friends he had made on a troop ship in the Atlantic. Charlie Hodge stayed in his life, and in the years that followed, that friendship would be tested in ways neither of them could have predicted at the time.